Good afternoon, LinkedIn. How are you today? I'm Gino Parati, and I'm welcoming you to our LinkedIn learning session. I try to keep these to 20 to 30 minutes just to make them really concise, which tends to be my communication and teaching style. Give a maximum quality with minimal input or minimal energy expenditure. To me, that's the sweet spot of learning. So keep it short, keep it sweet, keep it interesting, keep it valuable. Our topic for today is going to be about learning about our listening styles. So, the official title is Discover and Apply Your Listening Style for Effective Communication. Well, of course, we'll be getting into that very soon, but I want to welcome you all. If you're joining live here, go ahead and type in the chat where you're joining from. I am in New York City today, so I'm in Queens in my broadcasting studio, and I welcome you to my studio. What we're going to be doing is starting with an introduction. So, very brief. I just want you to know the person that you're going to be learning from. Some of you, of course, I know you from interacting via LinkedIn or a lot of in person networks, which have extended to the virtual world here on LinkedIn. My background is interpersonal communication. If you've never heard of that title before, basically what we do in our field is study relationships, inter, amongst, or between, personal, so people. So we study relationships. It's a combination of psychology, sociology, and anthropology. And basically, we care about when the human animal comes together, whether it's friendships, romances, families, communities, organizations, cultures, nations. How do we form an idea of who we are, and how do we build and maintain relationships? Of course, this is all done through communication. Chi, hi. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining from Atlanta today. Nice to have you, Chi. We are going to do this 2010 format, so 20 minutes of lecture. Feel free to type in the chat at any point, but I saved the last 10 minutes or so specifically for Q&A, and that'll be the time to really get into hopefully application if you have specific questions about that. You see me looking down because the style, I also teach public speaking. The style of speaking that I do for these is called extemporaneous, and it's a conversational style, meaning I have an outline here. I prepare a list of notes, but I haven't scripted it out. So I need to look down, see my next talking point, and I'm just going to talk with you. Extemporaneous speaking style is very good for building rapport and still getting all the information that you need. Maybe that'll be one of our upcoming LinkedIn Live is the 4 different styles of speech delivery. That would actually be a good topic. So getting into what it is today, discovering and applying your listening style for effective communication. I think first we need to talk about what is effective communication. Communication is all about senders and receivers. So for me, I look at the variables of the people first. That's my approach to communication. Always people first, always relationships first. So if we're looking at the people in the communication models, those would be the senders, which in this case it's me, the speaker, and the receivers, those who are doing the listening. So effective communication is that the message that the sender is transmitting is fully and accurately being received and interpreted by the listener. So that's what I mean by the idea of effective, meaning you said it the way you wanted to say it, and they got it the way you wanted them to get it, and therefore the conclusion, the behavior, the thought, the feeling that was transmitted is accurate. So we'll focus mostly on that listening style. But what gets really interesting is in a speaking situation, there is listening happening on both ends. Yes, for the people called the listeners, in this case, those of you joining me for this LinkedIn Live and listening to this brief lecture. Then there's the back end of it, which is the speaker's also listening to feedback. So I'm taking a look at the chat. If I was live and in person, I'd be monitoring your body language, your eye contact, your posture. Do people seem like they have questions? Do they seem engaged? All of that feedback is coming back to the speaker in real time, and it should influence our communication behavior. So that's also listening. To help you understand how to be a more effective listener, we need to first understand the different styles. And there are a bunch of different scholars who have done research on this. So if you pick up any textbook or any book on listening, it's going to be a lot of different lists and a lot of different names for these styles. And that's okay, right? The more people thinking about it and studying it, the more two things will happen. The more we can discover new things. Hey, Jacqueline, welcome. The more we can discover new things, because if you're the only scholar who's found this in your research, then that's really interesting. No one's ever seen it from this way before. But the other valuable thing is, even though these lists may call the names different titles, you're this type of listener. If they basically are the same thing, that to me is even more interesting, because if independent researchers have done their own studies and they've all arrived at the same basic conclusions, the more evidence then we have that this is probably accurate. So just be aware that this is one particular survey instrument that I'm going to be sharing with you. And you can have different styles that you're already familiar with, but they're probably going to be very similar to the four that I'm presenting. Listening is 50% of the responsibility of the speaker. So that's something I want you to walk away with. To be an effective communicator, it's half the time the listener doesn't have to listen to us. So the responsibility for listening is 50% theirs. So if you're receiving it, be alert, pay attention. But the other 50% lies with the speaker. Are you presenting this in a way that is inviting? It's not forced upon people. People don't want to do things that are forced in general. And is it inviting? Is it relevant to them? Do they have a natural interest? Have you uh, used words that are naturally appealing to them? Have you showed them how it's applicable in their lives with at least a sentence? We call this a relevant statement in public speaking. I highly encourage you to do that, because when you accept at least 50% of the responsibility as the speaker, it will make for a better exchange. People want to listen to you, and they show up with that energy, and it should be more well received. Listening is an under practice skill, and we talk about this often in my field of communication. So I told you my field is interpersonal. I've taught at several universities, and I still teach on a college campus. I've worked at University of Central Florida in Orlando, worked at Columbia University in New York City, and the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. I'm currently with Baruch College in New York, and I've guest lectured at many schools, including NYU and Grove City College. So we talk about this in our field. Then I also bring this into consulting work and coaching work with individuals and organizations. And that's kind of where the light bulbs go off, because individuals and organizations don't tend to think about what we've been talking about in academia for a long time. And that is, we know how important listening skills are, but they are very much under practiced. And even when you look at our formal teaching, our curriculum in academia, we'll teach like a 20-minute lesson on listening, but we'll spend 90% of the course on the speaking part. So we don't ever really practice listening. This is my attempt to help fix that, or help promote listening skills, because it's important. So let's get into the main bulk. I know this is what you've been waiting for. The four main styles. Here are the names. Feel free, if you have a pen, paper, you have your phone, you want to take some notes, that would be awesome. I don't have any visual aids today. I'm just going to speak with you. The first style is active listening. And an active listener, this takes a great deal of energy. When you are an active listener, it's all eyes, all ears, nothing else is around you. And I'm thinking back to my nephew, who's 19 now, but I'm thinking back when he was around 1 year old. He loved this one cartoon. I forget, Baby Einstein. I think, yeah, that was the name of the video series, Baby Einstein. He would be entranced in front of one of those videos. You'd walk by him and you'd call his name. He wouldn't even hear you. He was so fixated on what was on that screen for that Baby Einstein video. He was active listening because nothing else existed around him. Active can be really beneficial for learning some things, for listening to rules, for listening to directions. Gosh, I wish I wish more people were active listeners when it came to looking at directions and getting them correctly. Um, but active also takes a great deal of energy, which I'll touch upon in an upcoming point. So active is the first style. The second style of four is involved. So involved is similar to active, but it's one step down in terms of energy input. You're not all eyes, all ears. So what I talk about, hello, thank you very much for joining from India. What I use as an example is my students in the classroom. That if you are sitting in a classroom for a 75-minute class, there is no way that you can be an active listener and maintain your sanity. That's way too much energy and concentration. Your stomach will grumble. So all of a sudden you were listening to that for a moment, to this, what's called internal noise. You heard a sound out in the hallway. So you looked, you hear the air conditioner come on. A text message came through. You're not going to check it, but you felt the vibration, so it took your attention away. That's involved. So you're still present. Even taking notes means that you're not looking and listening to the professor at every single moment. And that's good for a lecture because you're listening enough and then you're translating it into your notes. So you're taking it in order to put a note down. So that's involved listening. It is still very much present, but less energy because you're doing other things like taking notes or responding to other stimuli like your stomach grumbling or your phone buzzing at the same time. So evolved can be a very effective listening style in some scenarios like a classroom, a meeting. The third style is passive listening. Passive listening is when, excuse me, dry throat. Passive listening is when you are receiving a message. So think about being at a live theater performance. I'm in New York, so Broadway. If I'm sitting in the audience watching a Broadway show, then I'm a passive listener. I'm not interacting. I'm not necessarily paying attention and doing any kind of translating. I'm just absorbing what's around me. This is a typical style for entertainment, watching television as well, unless you're my nephew with those captivating baby Einstein. But you're just passively receiving. And I teach a persuasion class, and the textbook actually talks about one of the downsides of this is that messages like marketing or even ideology. And if you're not familiar with ideology, it's basically the way a particular group sees the world. So we can have cultural ideologies, national ideologies, religious ideologies. They're embedded in messages. They're embedded in songs, and even just dialogue that's happening between characters. There's philosophies that are underlying what people are saying and believing in that dialogue. And when we're a passive listener, we are letting our critical thinking defenses down. So, unlike active and involved, where things are getting filtered and we're processing and we're translating into our own language, passive, we're just receiving. So, we can bring these things in and they can bring enjoyment, like entertainment. But the downside to that is they're also, the gates are open, the critical thinking's down. We can also start being indoctrinated with messages. So, that's the double side of entertainment or passive listening. The last style of the four. So I talked about active, involved, passive. Hey, Sarah, welcome. Active, involved, passive. And here's the last one. Don't get hung up on the name because a lot of people hear this and they think bad. It's not bad. Each one of these styles is appropriate for a different scenario. And this last one is called detached listening. Yeah, who wants to be a detached listener? Well, sometimes you do. And those of us who live in New York and ride the subway, we totally get that. Great place to detach. When you're a detached listener, you may physically be present, but you are withdrawing from the speaking scenario or the listening scenario. On the negative side, think of the time that your parents may say, take out the garbage, and you aren't really responding to them. Hey, I said, take out the garbage. Hello, you have a chore, take out the garbage. So they're telling you you're not responding because you're detached. And then the interesting about detached is the message tends to change. Instead of them saying, get up now, take out the garbage, they tend to switch, and the garbage is no longer the subject of the conversation, but you, in your lack of listening, becomes the subject. So it'll say something like, why don't you listen when I speak to you? I'm your parent. Show me some respect. So we can become the object of the message if we're a detached listener because all of a sudden people are just frustrated and we're not listening. But what we see on the subway that can be so beneficial with detached listening is that we get a lot of people who ask for money. Yes, well said. Physically present, mentally absent. Correct. Sometimes, though, we can fake detach, and that's what I'm going to say here with this subway example. We have, it's very common to have at least one person on your subway trip, every subway trip, one person asking for money. Some people are beggars just asking for money, but we also have some people who have mental illness and you don't know if they're dangerous or not. So if they come through asking for money, you see a lot of people ignoring. They'll take out their phones, be pretend to do something on their phone. So they refuse to make eye contact with the person asking for money. They'll have their headsets in. They'll pretend to be sleeping. Anything to what's called block input. So eye contact and ears open. that's inputting their message, the asking for money. So by detaching, we put what are called blockers. We'll put our headsets on, or we put sunglasses on, or we close our eyes, or we look at our phone. By refusing to make eye contact or refusing to listen, that is when we're doing detached. If I do that though, because again, you never know if someone's just asking for money or if someone could actually be dangerous. If I detach like that, I'm actually always listening to see what their move is, to see if I need to be ready for anything for safety reasons. But that's the four style detached. There's advantages and disadvantages for each of those four styles. And if you're taking notes, let me say the names again: active, involved, passive, and detached. Once I get towards the end of this, I'll tell you where you can find the worksheet. It's a 10-question survey that will help you identify what your preferred style is. The advantages and disadvantages. I went over within those examples what some of the advantages and disadvantages were, but I wanted to do an overall blanket summary of what these advantages and disadvantages really are about. It's about an energy investment. Active listening can be amazing because it creates a really deep connection. You are totally physically present. It can be amazing. But trying to do that for a 75-minute class, 75-minute meeting, even a 45-minute meeting, that's a lot of energy. And if you need to be doing other things throughout the day, you may not be able to fully devote that amazing amount of focused energy to be an active listener. So that's why if it's a little bit longer, you may switch over to the involved style, and it's the best balance for that scenario. The second advantage or disadvantage is that level of connection and awareness. And I think that last style of detached really illustrates that you are purposefully breaking connection in my subway example so that the people will just walk past you and not stop and ask you for money. But yet you can still be aware of the sounds in the environment that may be safety issues, but you don't have to actually engage. One more thing about that subway example: when I first moved to New York, I lived in Pennsylvania for many years, which tends to have a very friendly outlook. We make eye contact and we say hello to strangers. And then I lived in Florida for a long time, and Florida's more mixed, so people act all different ways in Florida. But I was in a community of people who were like me, which is friendly. So I would make eye contact on the subway, and I learned really quickly that that's when the people come in straight at you and hold their hand out, and they expect things from you. So we learn these things from our environment, and that's why we have so many detached listeners on the subway. This can be important as well. So this helps us. The survey that I'm sharing, you can find on my website, helps us. The survey will help you answer 10 questions. It can get a maximum score of 50, and you'll see that the number range will tell you whether you fall into active, involved, passive, or detached. And it gives a little more detailed explanation of each of those. When this ends, I will post this on LinkedIn, and in the description, it'll have the link directly. But if you want to go now to my website, it's rightbrainjourneys.com, rightbrainjourneys.com, like the right brain. And then you go to resources and you'll see the listening styles survey there. It's free. I just want you to be able to have this information to really make some changes in the way that you communicate. So there you're going to learn your preferred listening style. And that kind of is your default, meaning most of us have one of these that we tend to default to. I tend to default to active listening, which is great for making meaningful relationships. I have a lot of very close friends, and it's great for building trust. Downside, you can hear it in my voice. As I'm getting more mature, I'm learning about the energy investment. At the end of the day, I can be extremely drained because I've been active listening all day to everybody, and it's too much. It's too much data input at this point of my life. So that's the other side of things. Good, Jackie. I'm glad that you'll be looking for that survey. Excellent. I'm happy for that. The next one that I want to say is, so the survey is focusing on you. And remember, in the beginning of this talk, I said about both the speaker and the listener. So that there's two people in the communication model. So we've been focusing on what's our preferred style. Let me understand myself better, which is great. Once you start to really see it within yourself and master this, then it becomes super interesting because it's easier for you to see the other people's style, even if they don't know it. They probably aren't conscious of their style, but your consciousness of your own being and your own listening style, you will start seeing it in other people, which goes back to awesome Chi, which goes back to the idea that an effective communication transaction is inviting, and 50% of the responsibility lies with the speaker. So if I'm observing you and I'm talking to you, and the way you're behaving and the way you're communicating back to me indicates that you are active or involved or passive or detached, I can accept my part of the responsibility for this speaking listening exchange and adapt how I'm communicating, what I'm saying, my body language, my tone of voice. I can change these things. And it's called communication accommodation theory, which I always laugh. It's like one of the duh theories. We actually did study this, and it is the basic duh, meaning everyone kind of knows this. It was found to be accurate because sometimes common knowledge isn't always accurate, or it was, but it's not now. But this communication accommodation theory says that good communicators adjust their communication for the listener. So that's what I mean by duh. Yeah, it is true. So you can start seeing it in other people. If you are speaking to someone that appears to be an active listener, then here's how you can respect that and engage them and be inviting. Have a short, meaningful and relational message, meaning it's short because they're paying attention to every single thing. That's what I tend to do. And after a while, if it's too long, more than 10, 15 minutes, it's overload, which is why I try to keep these 20 minutes ish, and we're at that time. I'll be finishing soon. A relational approach as well, meaning that an active listener, because they're picking up on your words, but also your energy, the emotions that you're transmitting through your nonverbals, there's a real chance to build a genuine connection with this human being. So you're not just handing them information if they're active listeners, they are connecting with you and your message. So take a little moment. Hi, how are you? Build a rapport. This person tends to care about relationships. If the person appears to be an involved listener, go a little bit slower because they're not paying attention to every single word. They may be taking notes, for example, or thinking of questions to ask you. So you've been stimulating their thoughts, and now they have a question and they're trying to remember the question while they're thinking of you. So keep that in mind. Go slower. It should also be meaningful, and some repetition is helpful. You don't have to literally repeat the same thing over again, but at least say it three different ways. Repetition of three tends to be the general rule. Three different ways, or do it non-verbally and say it. That can be helpful for an involved listener. For a passive listener, remember that was the example of being at a show, entertainment, a symphony, a Broadway show, for example, you're just watching. Remember, our critical listening can go down in that. So passive listeners, what will keep them engaged are stories. Focus a little more on the storytelling aspect of it. That will be very inviting because it's entertaining. Take your facts and put them in context of stories, and that will really appeal to a passive listener. And for our detached listeners, what can you do? Direct, brief, transactional. They don't really want to be here. They don't really want to listen. They're not putting energy into this. So if it's something they have to do, take out the garbage. Short, brief, to the point. And this is not about building a relationship. It's simply about handing over information. That will really be helpful for someone who's in a detached listening style. Okay, so what did we learn? We learned 4 listening styles: active, involved, passive, and detached. We learned when each of these can have their advantage and disadvantage. We learned that there's a survey on my website, rightbrainjourneys.com. If you click on resources, you will see that free listening survey. It's 10 questions, and you'll be able to see what your default style is. What I want you to take away is realizing that all of these are valuable. And even though you tend to have a default, I don't want you just to always be in that default. Now that you're knowledgeable about the 4 different styles, you're conscious, which is the theme of what I do, conscious communication. You can choose to move between the styles, amongst the styles. Which one would be the most beneficial for this scenario, for me and for the information? And then adapt it also when you're speaking to people to be more inviting based on what you believe their style is. All right, I'm looking at some questions. Good communication, eye contact, nonverbal cues, active increases active listening. Good notes, yes. Good takeaways. I think that's great. Nonverbal cues are very important. Those will be topics of upcoming learning sessions. Terry, how would you manage your active listening when you don't really find a connection with someone you're talking to? What I would ask is the connection, does it need to be a personal connection, or can we connect based off of the goal and or the information? Meaning, I teach a lot of students and I work with a lot of clients, and it's not always appropriate for me to know them on a personal level. It's a professional relationship. And what I mostly connect with the students and clients are on the results that we both want for them. The student wants an A and I want them to get an A. The client wants to achieve the goal, the communication goal. They want to be a better speaker, for example. They want to have more confidence when they communicate. They have that goal, and so do I. We built that into our plan together. So finding the connection is not always necessarily in liking the person. It's what are we working towards? That would be what I would build upon. For the active style as well, since it can be more about relations, can you find the common human thread? Terry, I recommend feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can send me a connection request. I have a 3 layers of diverse. Yeah, I would recommend we can chat about this, Terry. Connect with me. I have a 3 layers of diversity video. I was going to reference individual diversity, find the humanity that you can connect with them. But just saying that doesn't make sense unless you understand the model. So it's a 15-minute video that I'll be happy to share with you. So connect with me, reach out to me, and I will be happy to have a conversation. Some other ways that you can learn. I'm still going to be watching the chat here where you can go up until 4 more minutes, 12:30. I have a monthly newsletter. It's going to be published this afternoon. This is the 4th one. It's called Conscious Communication. So if you're connected with me as a first degree connection on LinkedIn, I invite you to do that. You'll get my newsletter. This one's going to be focused on this topic of listening. And then 2 weeks ago, I do these LinkedIn Lives every 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, it was on the idea of immediacy cues, which was more focused on nonverbal. How do you connect with people nonverbally? So, Terry, that one may be interesting for you as well. So, my monthly newsletter, it will be released this afternoon. I have organizational workshops and speaking engagements as well. I do everything communication. So, it's things like public speaking. That's the easiest for people to know. I also do communicating with confidence. I do nonverbal communication, so it can be very helpful for sales. I thank you very much, Johnson. I appreciate that. I do persuasion studies, which is super interesting. It's the psychology behind buying. That's the consumer side of it, but even just being influential. So if you're an influencer, you are using these persuasion skills, and it's helpful if you're conscious of them, because then you can actually be strategic and design an outcome. I also do one-on-one coaching. This is both in the professional and the personal world. I have clients who really want to become more effective speakers. And even though I do offer a virtual course for that, they want the one-on-one in the moment coaching. And we do, of course, the words itself, but we go even deeper. I'm an expert in nonverbal communication. So how do you create connections even virtually with people? Those are the things that I can help coach people on. I also do some relational coaching. That's not my main focus, but to be honest with you, communication is about relationships, because when we communicate, we relate. And when we relate, that is the work of relationships. So I have clients as well who I help them strengthen their personal relationships. Final thing I'll mention is I do have some courses. Right now, the public speaking course is in session. I do that twice a year. So the fall cohort will be coming up. It's a 9-week course, and we have 6 live meetings over those 9 weeks with some online modules as well. And we build fundamental business communication skills. You start with a foundational values discovery exercise, which will really help you connect with what's important to you. Then we move into elevator pitches, bios. We move into a sales presentation, and you get tons of feedback on that. So you're going to walk away with practical business tools. The other one I'll mention, then I'm going to go to questions again, is I'm building out a nonverbal course. So I'll be working on that through the summer. That should be ready to go by the fall. Drop me your mail. Johnson, connect with me on LinkedIn. I think that's the easiest way. I'd love to connect with you as well. So Gino Parati here. You see my name in blue at the bottom of the video. I am the only Gino Parati with his name spelled this way in the world right now. That's very helpful. You can find me very easily since no one else has that name spelled that exact same way. And then that way you can message me. LinkedIn can be fantastic. You can also contact me through my website, rightbrainjourneys.com, because my email's on there. It's gino@rightbrainjourneys.com. Thank you. Anything else? Anything other questions you want to ask? As I'm waiting in our final minute to see if there's final questions, I'll mention that our next LinkedIn Live, I do these every 2 weeks. So our next LinkedIn Live will be on Wednesday, March 16th, same time, noon until 12:30 p.m. Eastern. The topic is going to be on message structure. So it's about getting you to understand outlining, but not the old academic Roman numeral. I can't stand that. And I've been in academia for a long time. I don't use that. I've developed an outline that I call the simple outline template that I find so helpful. And I bring this into all of my speaking occasions, even if I'm speaking at weddings, things like that. It's helpful for me. I know it up here so I can structure it. Thanks, Jackie. Thank you, Chi Chi. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining today, everybody. We're at 12:30, so I'm going to go ahead and end it. I wish you a great day, and I invite you back on March the 16th for our next learning session. If you're not connected with me, please do here on LinkedIn. Thank you. Bye-bye.